Saving an alien girl was just the beginning. Then Matt. The crew of the Horizon was accustomed to strange encounters in the vastness of space. As explorers of distant galaxies, they had seen things most people would never even dream of. But nothing could have prepared them for the sight they saw when they arrived at the planet of Zella. The planet was dying. A star was collapsing, and its powerful gravitational pull was tearing the planet apart. It was a scene of destruction beyond anything the crew had imagined. Captain Julian Granger, the leader of the Horizon mission, stood at the helm of the ship, staring at the swirling chaos on the planet's surface. The planet's surface was crumbling, and the atmosphere was filled with storms of dust and debris. They had come to study the planet, but now it seemed there was little hope left. The crew's mission had changed from exploration to rescue. "Captain, we've located life signs," came the voice of Lieutenant Maria Vale, the ship's communications officer. Her voice was tight with concern. Julian's eyes flickered toward the scanner. There, on the surface of the planet, hidden in the midst of the destruction, was a faint signal, a life sign. Someone or something was still alive down there. "Prepare a team," Julian said firmly. "We're going down." Within moments, Julian and his team were in the drop pod, making their way to the surface of the doomed planet. The air was thick with dust, and the sky was a chaotic mix of dark clouds and lightning. The team struggled to maintain their footing as they moved through the wreckage, making their way toward the source of the signal. Through the dust and smoke, they saw her. She was small, fragile-looking, and surrounded by a strange, shimmering energy field. Her skin was a pale blue, and her eyes, large and dark, stared up at them in shock. Her hair was long and silver, glowing faintly in the dim light. She seemed to be the last survivor of an ancient race, one that had lived on Zella long before the planet's destruction. Julian approached her cautiously. His first instinct was to protect her. Whoever or whatever she was the only life they had found on this planet. But there was something about her, something more than just her strange appearance. Julian couldn't explain it, but he felt a deep connection to her, as though their fates were tied together in some mysterious way. "Who are you?" Julian asked softly, kneeling in front of her. The girl didn't respond at first, just stared at him as though she were trying to make sense of his words. Then she spoke, her voice low and melodic. "I am Matria," she said, her accent strange, as though she were speaking a language long forgotten. "I am the last of my kind." Julian's heart skipped a beat. The last of her kind. What did that mean? The questions flooded his mind, but before he could ask another, a loud explosion rocked the ground beneath them. A fleet of ships appeared overhead, descending from the sky in a formation that was too precise to be anything other than an organized attack. Julian's heart sank. They were not alone. The enemy ships, sleek and dark, bore the insignia of the Zevari Empire, a ruthless race known for their expansionist ways and merciless tactics. Julian had heard of them, but he never thought he'd come face to face with them. Not like this. The Zevari fleet had come to claim what was left of the planet, and it seemed they had also come for Matria. Before Julian could give an order, a group of heavily armed Zevari soldiers landed nearby, surrounding them in a circle. The leader of the group stepped forward. He was tall and menacing, with dark armor and glowing red eyes. "Step aside, human," the Zevari commander growled. "The girl is ours." Julian instinctively stepped between Matria and the commander, his hand hovering near his blaster. "Not on my watch." The commander chuckled darkly. "You do not understand, do you? She is the key to our empire's future. We have waited for centuries to find her." Matria looked up at Julian, her expression both pained and resigned. "They are right," she said quietly. "I am the last of my kind. And I carry the secret that could save or destroy all of your people." Julian's heart raced. "What secret?" But before Matria could answer, the Zevari soldiers lunged forward, and the sound of blaster fire filled the air. The crew of the Horizon fought back, but the Zevari were well-trained and ruthless. Julian was thrown to the ground, his vision momentarily blurry. He could hear the sounds of his team engaging in battle, but his focus was solely on Matria. She was in danger, and Julian couldn't let them take her. He struggled to his feet, determination flooding his veins. As the battle raged on around him, he made his way to Matria, reaching out to grab her by the arm. "We need to get out of here. Now." Matria hesitated for a moment, then nodded. There was fear in her eyes, but also something else, trust. With Julian leading the way, they ran through the wreckage, dodging blaster fire and explosions. The Zeveri soldiers were hot on their heels, but Julian was determined to protect Matria at all costs. As they neared the drop pod, a sudden explosion knocked Julian off his feet. The world spun, and he felt the warmth of his blood spilling from a wound on his side. But Matria was there, her hand on his arm, pulling him up. "We have to go," she urged. Julian nodded, gritting his teeth against the pain. Together, they stumbled into the drop pod, and the door sealed behind them. As the pod shot up into the sky, Julian looked back at the planet below, the once beautiful world now a dying husk of its former self. The Zeveri fleet was still descending, but they were safe, for now. As the horizon rose into space, Julian turned to Matria. "You're safe now," he said, his voice soft. She nodded, her eyes filled with sorrow. "For now," she whispered. "But they will come for me again, and when they do, you will be the one who must decide whether to save me or destroy everything." Julian didn't know what she meant, but he knew one thing for sure. He had just saved an alien girl, and that was only the beginning. As the horizon ascended into space, the crew felt a mix of relief and unease. The battle on the planet's surface had been fierce, but they had made it out alive. Matria, the alien girl they had rescued, was now in the ship's medical bay, recovering from the traumatic events she had just experienced. Captain Julian Granger stood at the helm, staring out at the stars, his mind racing. The girl, Matria, was unlike any other being he had encountered in his years of exploration. She was fragile, yet there was a strength in her eyes that couldn't be ignored. Julian had seen many things in his career, but nothing had affected him like this. It wasn't just her beauty or her alien origins. It was the feeling that they were connected in a way that defied logic. The more he thought about it, the more he felt certain that rescuing her was just the beginning of something much larger. "Captain, the medical team reports that Matria is stable, but they're not sure how much damage she sustained from the encounter," came the voice of Lieutenant Maria Vale, the communications officer. "She's awake now, though." Julian nodded, his thoughts still clouded. "I'll be there in a moment," he replied. Walking down the corridor toward the medical bay, Julian felt a sense of urgency building inside him. He needed to understand who Matria was and why the Zeveri Empire had been after her. The sooner they could figure that out, the sooner they could put an end to the threat she was facing. As he entered the medical bay, he found Matria sitting up on a bed, her pale blue skin contrasting with the sterile white of the medical equipment around her. She looked fragile, almost delicate, but there was a determination in her eyes that Julian couldn't ignore. "How are you feeling?" Julian asked, taking a seat beside her. Matria looked at him, her dark eyes filled with both gratitude and sorrow. "I am better now," she replied softly, "but the danger is not over. The Zeveri will come for me again." Julian studied her closely. There was something about her that didn't quite add up. She wasn't just some ordinary alien. There was a weight in her words, a hidden meaning behind them. "I need to know more," Julian said, his voice serious. "Who are the Zeveri? Why do they want you so badly?" Matria hesitated, her gaze dropping to her hands. "The Zeveri are a conquering empire," she began, her voice tinged with sadness. "They have destroyed many worlds in their quest for power, and I am the last of my kind. My people were once great, but the Zeveri wiped us out. I am the keeper of an ancient power, something the Zeveri believe will give them control over the entire galaxy." Julian frowned, leaning forward. "What kind of power?" Matria's eyes met his, and for the first time, Julian saw fear in them. "I carry the heart of the void," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It is a device that can manipulate time and space. It is the key to creating or destroying entire civilizations. The Zeveri want it for themselves. If they get their hands on it, no one will be able to stop them." Julian's heart skipped a beat. The heart of the void. He had heard rumors of such a device, but he never imagined it was real. The implications were staggering. If the Zeveri could harness its power, they would become unstoppable. "We can't let them get it," Julian said, his mind racing. "But how do we stop them?" Matria's expression was filled with a mixture of fear and resolve. "I don't know," she admitted. "But I do know this. The heart of the void is not just a weapon, it is a tool of creation as well. I was chosen to guard it, to ensure that it is not used for evil. If the wrong hands control it, everything will be lost." Julian sat back in his chair, processing what she had just said. The fate of the galaxy rested on their shoulders. Matria's survival was no longer just about saving one life, it was about saving everything. "We'll protect you," Julian said firmly. I'll do whatever it takes to keep you safe. Matria looked at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. Thank you, Captain, but it may not be enough. The Zeveri will stop at nothing to get what they want. And once they find us again, they will not hesitate to destroy everything in their path. Just then, the ship's alarm blared, snapping Julian back to reality. Captain, we've got a problem. Maria's voice came through the intercom, urgent and tense. What's happening? Julian asked, his pulse quickening. It's the Zeveri fleet, Maria replied. They've tracked us. They're heading straight for us. Julian's heart sank. They didn't have much time. He quickly stood up. Get the crew to their stations, he ordered. We're not running this time. We're fighting. As the crew scrambled to prepare for battle, Julian turned to Matria. Stay here and stay hidden. We'll keep you safe, but we need to focus on stopping them. Matria nodded, but there was a look in her eyes that told Julian she wasn't about to sit idly by. She had already been through too much to be left in the shadows. I'm not hiding, she said quietly. I need to help. The Zeveri won't stop until they have me. I know how to use the Heart of the Void, but I need your help to reach it. Julian hesitated. He understood her desire to fight, but it was dangerous. It's too risky, he said. You don't know what could happen if you use it. Matria's gaze was unwavering. I'm the only one who can stop them, she replied. You can protect me, but in the end, it's up to me to destroy the Heart of the Void before the Zeveri can use it. Julian knew she was right. They couldn't win this war without her. All right, he said, his voice firm. We'll do it together, but we need to move fast. The sound of blaster fire erupted in the distance. The Zeveri were getting closer. Julian had no time to waste. He turned to the crew and barked out orders, preparing for the upcoming battle. As they engaged the enemy fleet, Julian felt a growing sense of urgency. The stakes were higher than ever, and Matria's fate, and the fate of the galaxy, was in their hands. The Heart of the Void could be their salvation, or it could be their destruction. The only thing that was certain was that they had to act fast. The battle raged on as the Horizon fired upon the Zeveri ships, but Julian's mind was elsewhere. He couldn't stop thinking about Matria and the power she carried within her. They had to stop the Zeveri, but the question remained. Could they protect her long enough to ensure the Heart of the Void would never fall into the wrong hands? The tension aboard the Horizon was thick, the air charged with a sense of urgency. Julian paced back and forth in the command center, his mind racing. The Zeveri fleet was closing in, their warships as imposing as they were deadly. They had no choice but to fight, but the stakes were higher than ever. If they couldn't stop the Zeveri, the Heart of the Void would fall into their hands, and it could mean the end of everything. Matria sat in a corner of the room, her presence quiet but powerful. Despite the chaos, she remained calm, her eyes focused, as though she was waiting for something. Julian couldn't help but admire her strength. She was the last of her kind, carrying a secret so dangerous that entire empires would destroy everything to possess it. Yet she showed no fear. She had already faced the destruction of her home, the loss of her people, and now the threat of the Zeveri, but she was still here, still standing. Captain, the Zeveri fleet is within range. Maria's voice echoed through the room, breaking Julian's thoughts. They're charging their weapons. Julian clenched his jaw, the weight of the situation settling on his shoulders. Prepare for battle. We're not running this time. The Horizon's weapon systems came to life with a hum of energy as the crew scrambled to their stations. The enemy ships were formidable, but they had one advantage. They were on the defensive. The Horizon was a fast, agile ship, equipped with advanced technology. They had the upper hand in speed and maneuverability, but the Zeveri had sheer firepower on their side. Captain, incoming fire! Maria shouted as a barrage of laser blasts lit up the space around them. The ship shook with the impact, but it held steady. Return fire! Julian barked, his voice sharp. The crew unleashed a volley of counterattacks, but the Zeveri were relentless, their ships closing in for the kill. Julian's mind raced as he watched the battle unfold on the viewscreen. He knew they couldn't keep this up forever. The Zeveri were too powerful. They needed a way to turn the tide in their favor, and fast. Matria's voice cut through the chaos. I can help, she said, her tone calm, as though she were speaking in a quiet room rather than in the middle of a space battle. Julian turned to her, confusion flickering across his face. What do you mean? We can't afford to. I know how to use the Heart of the Void, Matria interrupted gently. I can access its power. It's the only way we can survive. Julian's heart raced, the Heart of the Void. He had heard about its incredible power, but he had no idea what it would do in a situation like this. Are you sure? You said it's dangerous. We don't know what could happen if you use it. Matria's eyes met his, her gaze unwavering. I don't have a choice. The Zevary will destroy everything if I don't act. I must use it to protect us. Julian hesitated, but in the end, he knew she was right. They were running out of options. All right, do what you have to do, he said, his voice grim. Matria stood and made her way to the ship's central control panel. Julian followed, watching her every move. The crew continued to fight the Zevary ships, but Julian's focus was entirely on Matria. The air around her seemed to shimmer with energy as she extended her hand toward the panel. Her fingers brushed the surface, and a strange hum filled the room. The lights flickered, and the very air seemed to thrum with power. Hold on, Matria said softly, her voice barely audible. This will take all my focus. Julian felt the temperature in the room drop, and the ship seemed to lurch under a strange force. He braced himself, watching as Matria's eyes glowed faintly. It was as though she was tapping into something ancient, something beyond his comprehension. And then, without warning, the ship's systems went completely silent. The battle outside stopped. For a moment, everything was still. Then, with a flash of light, the Horizon's weapons came to life again, but this time they were different. The energy blasts weren't just ordinary projectiles. They were faster, stronger, and more precise. They hit their targets with devastating accuracy, tearing through the Zevary ships like paper. Julian stared in awe as the Zevary fleet began to disintegrate, their ships exploding one by one. It was as though the power of the Heart of the Void was coursing through the horizon, turning the tide of the battle in an instant. But Matria was trembling, her face pale, her eyes closed in concentration. Julian could see the strain on her face. The power she was drawing from the Heart of the Void was taking a toll on her, and he wasn't sure how much longer she could maintain it. We're almost through, Julian said, his voice low. We're winning. Matria's eyes flickered open, but they were filled with exhaustion. I can't hold it much longer, she whispered. I've given everything I have. Julian's heart sank. He had hoped this would be the moment they turned the tables, but now he saw the cost of the Heart's power. You need to stop, he said urgently. We can't risk overusing it. We'll fight them another way. But Matria shook her head weakly. It's too late. The Heart, it must finish what it started. Before Julian could say anything else, a flash of light erupted from the center of the battlefield. It was blinding, a shockwave that rippled through space. The Zevary ships were disintegrating at an accelerated rate, their energy dissipating in a brilliant explosion of light. And then everything stopped. The horizon hovered in the empty void of space, surrounded by the wreckage of the Zevary fleet. The battle was over. The enemy was gone, but Matria had collapsed. She lay unconscious on the control panel, her body drained of energy. Julian rushed to her side, panic rising in his chest. He checked her pulse, his heart racing. She was still alive, but barely. Matria, Julian called, his voice frantic. Her eyes fluttered open, but there was no strength in her voice. I did it, she whispered. The Zevary are gone. The Heart of the Void, it's sealed for now. Julian sighed with relief, but knew that the victory had come at a great cost. Matria had used all of her strength to stop the Zevary, and now she was left weakened, vulnerable. We'll get you help, Julian said gently, lifting her into his arms. You saved us, we owe you everything. Matria smiled faintly, her eyes closing again. No, you saved me first. Now we have time to rebuild. Julian looked out the window of the horizon at the shattered remains of the Zevary fleet. The stars were quiet again, and for the first time in what felt like forever, the galaxy seemed safe. But deep down, he knew this peace wouldn't last forever. The Heart of the Void was still out there, its power still a dangerous force. And there were others who would come for it. He couldn't let Matria down. He had promised to protect her, and now more than ever that promise would be tested. The silence that followed the battle was deafening. The horizon floated in the cold, empty void of space, its systems still reeling from the intense energy that had surged through the ship. Julian stood by the window in the command center, watching the remnants of the Zevary fleet dissipate into the darkness. The danger had passed, but the weight of the situation still hung heavily over him. Matria, the girl he had sworn to protect, was resting in the medical bay. Her body was weak from the power she had used to stop the Zevary, and she had barely regained consciousness since the battle. Julian could still feel the tremors in the air, the unspoken question of whether they were truly safe. They had won, but at what cost? Captain, we're receiving a distress signal, Maria's voice broke through his thoughts. It's from a nearby colony on the planet Rara. They're under attack. The Zevari are regrouping. Julian's heart sank. The Zevari had been defeated, but they were far from finished. It seemed like the battle for Matria's survival was just one part of a much larger war. Set a course for Rara, Julian said, his voice firm. We need to get there before the Zevari do. If they've regrouped, they'll want revenge. He turned and made his way to the medical bay. As he entered, he found Matria still lying in a bed, her breathing shallow but steady. Her eyes fluttered open when she sensed him approaching, and she gave him a weak smile. We've won, haven't we? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Julian nodded. For now. But the war is far from over. The Zevari are regrouping, and we need to move fast if we're going to protect the colonies. Matria's eyes darkened as she heard the news. She tried to sit up, but her strength wasn't enough. Julian gently helped her back down, concern written all over his face. You're not well enough, he said. You need rest. We'll handle this. But Matria shook her head. I can't rest. I can feel them, the Zevari. They won't stop until they have me. They'll use the heart of the void for their conquest. I can't let that happen. Julian's heart ached as he looked at her. She was the key to ending this war, but she was also the target. No matter how hard he tried to protect her, the Zevari would never stop hunting her. You've already given everything, Julian said softly. I can't let you do this alone. Matria smiled faintly. You're not alone, Captain. You've all fought beside me, but this time it's not just about survival. It's about keeping the heart of the void out of their hands forever. Julian was silent for a moment, his mind racing. He had never imagined that he would be leading a war against an empire like the Zevari. But now it was personal. It wasn't just about saving a planet or a colony. It was about protecting Matria and ensuring that the heart of the void never fell into the wrong hands. All right, he said finally. We'll go to Rara, but once we're done, we're getting you somewhere safe. You deserve peace. Matria nodded, but there was a sadness in her eyes. Peace? I've never known peace. My people were wiped out, and now I carry their burden. I can't stop fighting until the Zevari are gone. Julian sighed, understanding the weight of her words. She had already lost everything. She was the last of her kind, the final guardian of a power that could shape the fate of the galaxy. How could she ever rest when she carried such a responsibility? The crew of the Horizon quickly set course for Rara, and within hours, they arrived at the planet's orbit. The colony below was in chaos, the skies darkened with the smoke of burning buildings. The Zevari fleet had arrived ahead of them, and the colony was under heavy attack. We need to get down there, Julian said, his jaw set. Prepare the drop pods. The crew quickly launched the pods, descending toward the planet below. As they approached the surface, Julian's eyes scanned the chaos below. The Zevari had already begun their assault, their ships hovering above the ground, firing upon the colony with relentless force. The people of Rara were fighting back, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. The drop pods touched down with a thud, and the crew quickly exited, weapons at the ready. The streets of Rara were littered with debris, the air thick with the smell of smoke and burning metal. Julian could hear the sound of blaster fire in the distance, the desperate cries of people fighting for their lives. We're too late, Maria said, her voice tinged with frustration. The Zevari are already inside the city. We're not too late, Julian said, his voice filled with determination. We're here to stop them. The team made their way toward the center of the colony, where the Zevari were staging their main assault. They fought their way through the streets, encountering both Zevari soldiers and the brave colonists who were defending their homes. The battle was fierce, but the Horizon crew was skilled and determined. They fought side by side with the colonists, pushing the Zevari back one street at a time. As they reached the central plaza, Julian saw the Zevari commander standing on a raised platform, directing his forces. The sight of him filled Julian with a cold fury. This was the man who had ordered the destruction of Matria's people. This was the man who would stop at nothing to claim the heart of the void. Julian signaled to his team, and they moved into position, preparing to engage the Zevari commander. The air was thick with tension as they closed the distance. Suddenly, the commander turned, his eyes locking onto Julian's. You again, the Zevari commander sneered. You think you can stop us? We already have, Julian said, his voice steady. It's over. The commander growled, raising his weapon, but before he could fire, Matria stepped forward. Her presence was like a force of nature, her eyes glowing with a strange power. She held out her hand, and the ground beneath the commander's feet trembled. No more, she said, her voice carrying an authority that Julian had never heard before. This ends now. The commander faltered, his weapon shaking in his hands. Matria's power was overwhelming, and in that moment Julian saw the fear in the Zevari commander's eyes. He knew they had lost. With a final, defiant scream, the commander turned and fled, his forces following in disarray. The battle was over. The streets of Rara were quiet once more, but the cost had been great. The colony was in ruins, and many lives had been lost. But they had won. The Zevari had been driven back, and Matria had played a crucial role in their defeat. As the crew surveyed the damage, Julian felt a pang of sadness. The victory felt hollow, the weight of the war still pressing on his chest. They had won this battle, but the war was far from over. The Zevari would regroup, and they would come again. He turned to Matria, who was standing at the edge of the plaza, gazing out over the ruined city. She had saved them, but she was still haunted by the loss of her people. Julian knew that she would never truly find peace until the Zevari were gone for good. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice soft. Matria turned to him, her expression somber. "I will never be all right, but I will keep fighting until the Zevari are no more." Julian nodded, understanding the depth of her resolve. He had promised to protect her, but now he knew that their fight was far from over. The Zevari were a threat, and they would not stop until they had destroyed everything. But as long as he had Matria by his side, he knew they had a chance. The battle for Rara had ended, but Julian couldn't shake the feeling that it was only the beginning. The Zevari had been pushed back, their fleet retreating from the planet after their defeat, but the war was far from over. Matria stood beside him, her eyes scanning the ruins of the city, her face drawn and tired, yet there was a quiet determination in her gaze. They had won, yes, but at what cost? The colony was in ruins, the people broken but resilient, their homes and livelihoods shattered in the wake of the Zevari invasion. Julian had seen it countless times in his years of service, but it never got easier. The destruction, the lives lost, it all weighed heavily on his heart, but they couldn't stop now. Matria's voice broke through his thoughts, soft but resolute. "We've saved them for now, but the Zevari will return, they always do." Julian turned to her, his expression serious. "I know, but we're not done, not yet." He could see the exhaustion in her eyes, but also a fire that refused to go out. Matria had been through more than anyone should ever have to endure. She had watched her people be wiped out by the Zevari, had carried the burden of the heart of the void alone for so long, and yet she was still here, still fighting. "Are you sure you're all right?" Julian asked, concern flickering in his voice. Matria nodded, though the faint tremble in her hands betrayed her calm demeanor. "I will be, but I need to keep going. The heart of the void, it's the only way to end this." Julian knew that she wasn't just talking about the Zevari. The heart of the void wasn't just a weapon, it was the key to everything. Matria had said it before, that it could create or destroy entire civilizations. It was the most powerful force in the universe, and the Zevari were determined to claim it. "We need to keep the heart safe," Julian said, his voice firm. "We'll do whatever it takes." Matria looked at him, her gaze softening. "I know you'll protect me, Captain, but it's not just about me anymore. It's about the future of the galaxy. We can't let the Zevari use the heart. It would be the end of everything." Julian nodded, understanding the weight of her words. The future was at stake, and Matria was the only one who could prevent the galaxy from falling into darkness. But she couldn't do it alone. He had promised to protect her, and that meant doing everything in his power to ensure she didn't have to carry this burden by herself. "We'll fight them together," Julian said, his voice steady. "We'll find a way to stop the Zevari once and for all." But as the days passed and they continued their journey through space, the weight of the situation began to settle more heavily on Julian's shoulders. They had been to Rara, but there were countless other colonies out there, places where the Zevari could strike next. They needed to gather allies, strengthen their defenses, and prepare for the inevitable return of the Zevari fleet. Matria, despite her exhaustion, was working tirelessly. She spent hours at a time in the ship's command center, analyzing data and strategizing with the crew. She had become more than just the girl they had rescued. She was a leader, and her knowledge of the heart of the void was invaluable. But Julian couldn't ignore the toll it was taking on her. He saw the way her energy waned each day, how her body seemed to grow weaker the more she pushed herself. It wasn't just the physical strain of their constant battles, it was the emotional burden. Matria had lost everything, her home, her people, her purpose. Now she was carrying the future of the galaxy on her shoulders. "Captain," Maria's voice came through the intercom, breaking Julian's thoughts. "We've received another distress signal. It's from the planet Galia." Julian sighed. "Not again." "Not just any distress signal," Maria continued. "It's from the Galactic Council. They're asking for help. The Zeveri are attacking their capital." Julian's heart sank. The Galactic Council was the heart of the galaxy's defense. If the Zeveri attacked them, it would signal the beginning of a full-scale war. "We're heading there now," Julian said, his voice resolute. "Prepare the ship." The crew quickly mobilized, and within hours, the Horizon was en route to Galia. The journey was long, and the weight of what they might find weighed heavily on Julian's mind. The Zeveri had already attacked colonies, and now they were targeting the very government that stood against them. If the Galactic Council fell, the Zeveri would be unstoppable. As they entered Galia's orbit, the situation became clear. The capital city was under siege. Zeveri warships hovered above, raining destruction down upon the city below. The people of Galia were fighting back, but they were no match for the Zeveri's overwhelming firepower. "We have to stop this," Julian muttered to himself, his grip tightening on the ship's controls. "We can't do it alone," Maria said, her voice filled with concern. "We need reinforcements." "We'll take what we can get," Julian said, determination in his voice. "Prepare for the drop." The team launched into the battle below, the ground shaking with each explosion. The Zeveri were relentless, their ships moving in perfect formation as they continued their assault. But Julian and his crew weren't going to back down. They fought through the streets, the sound of blasters and explosions ringing in the air as they pushed forward toward the heart of the city. As they reached the central plaza, Julian could see the Zeveri commander standing in front of the Galactic Council building, directing his forces. The leader of the Zeveri Empire, the one who had been hunting Matria for so long, was here. Julian's blood boiled with rage. This was the man who had wiped out Matria's people, the one who would stop at nothing to claim the heart of the void. This time, Julian was going to put an end to him. The team made their way toward the commander, their weapons raised, ready to fight. The air crackled with tension as they closed the distance, the Zeveri soldiers moving to intercept them. But just as they were about to engage, a voice rang out. "Stop!" Matria stepped forward, her expression calm but determined. Julian tried to stop her, but she held up a hand, silencing him. "This ends now," Matria said, her voice steady but filled with authority. "You have no right to take what doesn't belong to you." The Zeveri commander sneered, his eyes narrowing as he stepped toward her. "You think you can stop me? You are nothing. Your people are gone. You are the last of your kind, and I will take the heart of the void. The galaxy will belong to me." Matria's eyes glowed with power, her hand raised as though drawing energy from somewhere deep within. "The heart of the void is not a tool for conquest," she said, her voice ringing with finality. "It is a force of creation and destruction. You will never control it, not while I am alive." The commander laughed, his voice dark and mocking. "You think you can stop me, girl? You are weak." With a sudden movement, Matria extended her hand, and the ground beneath the commander trembled. The energy from the heart of the void surged through her, and the Zeveri commander was thrown back, his forces scattering in all directions. The Horizon crew stood in awe as Matria's power filled the air, a force beyond anything they had ever seen. The Zeveri commander, once so confident, was now on the ground, struggling to rise. "This is where your empire ends," Matria said, her voice filled with strength and resolve. The Zeveri forces, realizing their defeat, began to retreat, their ships falling back into space. Julian watched as Matria stood tall, the weight of everything she had been through written on her face. The war wasn't over, but this was a victory that would carry them forward toward the end of the Zeveri's reign of terror. As the battle ended, Julian approached Matria. "You did it," he said quietly. Matria nodded, her expression softening. "We did it together." And for the first time in a long time, Julian allowed himself to hope. The galaxy wasn't lost yet. There was still a chance.